How can we predict the price of Bitcoin?
But we're not going to see anything below 60,000 ever in the history of Bitcoin.
What does happen when Apple tomorrow comes out and says, we are now buying with all our reserves Bitcoin?
We have these strategies called weighted DCA. So we are going to give a weight to the different phases of where you are.
When will we break the 1 million US dollar barrier?
We should reach 1 million around.
As a full disclosure, I want to start off with, I only buy and hold Bitcoin. So those models are really interesting for me to see patterns, to see things, but I'm just like a hodler. I'm just buying Bitcoin.
Yeah, but you will see I'm actually going to explain that it is also useful for hodler because, and I will explain why, because I think it goes from everything, right? From somebody who wants to be a little bit more aggressive to actually somebody that is a hodler because, let's say, and we are already recording.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say, for example, I don't know. Let's say we were the last cycle, right? And we know that Bitcoin we peaked 70,000, right? And 3 days in advance, I'm going to tell you, hey, it's going to be in 3 days from now. We're going to reach a peak. Wait a little bit. You have all this money saved up for buying Bitcoin, right? Because maybe you're doing it on a monthly basis or whatever you do some DCA. Wait a little bit, wait a few months because it's going from 70,000 to 16,000 if you wait this amount of time. And in fact, you don't even need to wait 16,000. Wait until it's 30. Wait until it's 25. And my algo can tell you how long it's going to take, when we are going to reach the bottom, and when it's time to buy again, right? You can always wait a little bit, right, to buy your Bitcoin. Now, of course, you say, well, but then the risk is going up, right, and you are wrong. Well, of course, right, there is a risk on everything. But this is a limited risk, right? So you can still do your hodling and your only buy policy, but also maybe understand Bitcoin. It's like if we love Bitcoin, we'll also need it to understand. And I think I found a way to actually understand what really Bitcoin is doing. Now you have to trust my understanding and my model, but there is space also for hodler in this approach. So everybody can be helped by this knowledge of the cycles.
Yeah, that's why I'm really interested in it, because you can always have an DCA plan, but still buy in chunks here and there. Yeah,
exactly. We have these strategies called weighted DCA. So we are going to give a weight to the different phases of where you are. In fact, right now we are even developing this terminology. We'll explain it later, of a clock. We can tell you what is a Bitcoin time in the cycle, and according to where we are in the clock, you can give a weight, right? I'm going to buy more when we are here, and I'm not going to buy much here, and so on. So you don't have to buy and sell, even if that is a possible approach. You can also just simply buy at the right time, So it's also good for hodling.
Maybe let's start right into it. What is the power law outside of Bitcoin? Because it's a thing outside of Bitcoin also.
Yes.
What is it in the most simple terms?
Okay, sure. So, I am a physicist. That is my background, right? So physics is the study of nature, right? This, in fact, what it means. Physics means nature. And so we want to understand different patterns in nature, right? Usually, if we want to express it with some kind of mathematical formula, right? It's like a relationship between things. And then once we find a particular pattern and the mathematical formula that describe this particular phenomena, we want to understand it. We want to go deeper and try to see why it's behaving in this way. But, the first step is always finding these relationships, right? So, for example, I use this all the time because it's probably the first time that scientists talked about some kind of a power law. I think actually there was another example, and that example was Galileo. So we can also use that. So let me give you a couple of historical examples, right? So the first historical example was Galileo. So he, from my country, I'm Italian. He's also, it's like he kind of actually created the field of physics. He was the first one. He also came up with this idea of a scientific method, how to explore something with a scientific approach and different steps to do that. So he understood, he was studying animals. And you see, at that time, there was still this Aristotelian way of looking at the world. It was like making analogy. He was not as scientific as Galileo did. He actually has this famous phrase that says, nature is a book and is written in the language of mathematics. So beautiful, right? Because it really applies to what we are discussing here. So in this case, what in the power law, what he was trying to understand how animals size up. In fact, actually, this is a very good example also in terms of this idea of sizing up. What sizing up means, right? So if I study something that goes from being a small thing to something that is much larger, I'm not interested in small little changes. I want to see what happens when the animal becomes maybe 10% bigger, 20% bigger, 30% bigger. Or if you have something that also changed by a lot, like for example Bitcoin, right? They went from being a few cents to almost $100,000, right? That every time it changes by a factor of 10, so it goes from 0.1, 1, 10, 100,000, and so on. That is size. That is one term. The other term we use is scale. The scale. So if you try to forget the details, but you look at these large changes and try to see what happens. Maybe like for example, you're looking at time in this case, how much time it takes to change, right? Or maybe a relationship between two things. Like for example, in the case of Galileo, he was looking at how big an animal becomes as it grows, and he realized that basically, I know we make this joke in physics that we call them the spherical cows. Like if you are trying to understand a cow, make it to in a sphere, initially at least. Later you can go in the details, but initially think it as a sphere, because sphere is so simple to describe, right? It's an approximation. So if you imagine an animal being kind of a blob thing, right? A sphere, a spherical cow, and the cow grows, it grows with, let's say, with the radius, right? Bigger the radius, bigger the cow. And then with what quantity exactly? Well, the cube, right? Because the volume of the cow grows with the cube, right? So, and mass is the same, right? Bigger the volume, if the density is the same, bigger the mass, right? And so, and it's going up with the cube. So if I, for example, double the size of the animal, the mass of the animal doesn't go up by a factor of 2. It goes by a factor of 8, because it's 2 to the 3, right? If the animal becomes 3 times, then I have to take the 3 to the cube, right? So 3, 3, 3, right? So that is 27. So you see, it's important to understand how something scales in terms of the power. You see, the power here is the cube. Okay, so this is one of the clues to understand power laws. And this is why they are called power, because we are talking about some quantity raised to the power, right? And the power can be 2, 3. Like, for example, volume goes up with the cube. What about the area? The area, for example, of the feet of an animal, right? The animal needs to walk, and usually, like in our case, our feet touch the ground, right? And that is the area of the animal. And that area, how does it grow? It doesn't grow with a cube. It grows with the square, right? Because this is what area is. So this is another relationship that goes with the power of the quantity that we're looking at. And so he realized that as an animal grows, there is kind of a ratio, right? That is basically how much weight the animal will have on the foot, right? On his bones, because the bones they need to make contact with the ground, right? So it's a question of the volume over the area, right? So actually that relationship, r cube over r square, we get r, right? So as the animal becomes bigger and bigger, this relationship between mass and the surface on which an animal can walk, it goes up linearly, right? So it's a straight line in a graph. And if I do this quantity, that is the ratio between the mass and the surface area of the animal, right, that has contact with the ground. If you take this ratio, it goes up, right, with linearly, right? These two quantities. So there is the r cube and r square. I can make a graph of these two quantity, and I get some kind of straight line. And whenever you have a relationship of this kind, where there is one quantity changing in relationship to another with some kind of a power, you can visualize it better by taking a graph of the log of one quantity versus the log of another. So this type of graph, that not many people are familiar, but in physics we are very familiar with, is called a log-log graph. And if something has the type of relationship that I described, that depends on the power, then it looks like a straight line. And this is what happened also with Kepler, I was mentioning, because in this case, I tell this story all the time because actually, in a sense, these were really this idea of plotting things in a log-log graph started. He was looking for a pattern in the universe because he thought that the planets were not moving just by chance, but because there was some kind of underlying law. He was not aware of the law yet. Again, you remember this was the beginning of science, so we were still influenced by all these ancient ideas, about planets moving in perfect orbits. We had all kind of mystical idea about the universe, but he wanted to start to use math to actually understand if it was a very specific pattern. And so he tried many different things, and finally, because log was something, the log, the log basically, what the log does. So if I have let's say a log of 10, right, that is this function, and that apply to a number like 100, it gives me the power. So 10 to the 2 is 100, right? And so if I take the log 10 of 10 to the 2, the answer is 2. If I take the log of 1000, because 1000 is 10 to the 3, the answer of that operation of taking the log is 3, and so on. So you see, it's almost like I'm asking through the log, what is the size of this number, right? And it gives me the power. The power is the size, right? So he did this thing. He took the distance of the planets from the sun, because they knew, right? They had hundreds of century and century observations of the planets, how they move, and so on. So they had all this very detailed information, all on paper. It was crazy. They did all this. They didn't have computers at the time. We had to do everything on paper, very carefully, very accurately. I don't know how they did it, because modern scientists don't have that feeling. We do everything by computers, and so he measured, right? He wrote down the numbers associated with the distance of the planets, and he took the log of this distance, and then on the y-axis he had the time, the log of the time, or you can do the other way around, it doesn't matter, the log of time, right? But in fact, let me put it in the y-axis, on the x-axis, because it's what they did with Bitcoin. So he put the log of time in the x-axis, and the time in this case is the time that it takes the planet to go around the sun, right? So when he did that, he was shocked, because he could see this beautiful organized. I have a graph that I can show you in a moment. Beautiful organized line. All the planets were little dots, and you could draw. There are mathematical techniques to draw these lines, but in that case, you could draw it by hand. You could just join the dots, because they were so perfectly along this line that you could do it by hand almost. And he was shocked. And then, because he knew the mathematics, he could write a formula that tells you how long a planet takes to go around as a function of its distance, or vice versa, right? So if I know how long it takes a planet to go, because this is usually what you observe. You look at this planet, you see when it comes back in the same spot of the sky. Some of the planets take years and years. You have to be very patient. Jupiter takes 12 years, right? Imagine being there every night for 12 years, like a Bitcoin. It took 12 years, right? 15 years. And in one big, more than the life of Bitcoin, and Jupiter comes back, right? And then if you have that information, even if it is a planet that you never saw before, because of this law, you can say, oh, I know how long it takes to go around the sun. I know the distance now. Even if you may not measure it, because there is this law, all the planets then follow it. And so by that time, right, so it's several hundred years, we found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these power laws everywhere in nature. So it's not really like, oh, that is the main thing about physics, but it's really a big chunk, like a lot of phenomena. And the interesting thing, right? So in physics, we really like when we see what is called universality. So different phenomena that don't seem like what Bitcoin has to do with the planets, right? And this is one of the things that I hear all the time from people that don't know science or they don't know physics. What is corresponding? Why there is any relationship? Well, because with what we do in physics is exactly that. We look for, oh, this thing behaves like this other. They have the same behavior, so in a sense they are the same. Like, for example, waves, right? This is another thing that we study in physics. The waves in the sea, the sound, that we hear, that is a wave. The light is a wave, right? Very different level of abstractions of a wave, because usually you don't see light as a wave, but it is a wave. It is a wave. And this is what with physics, we get really, really excited when we see this universal pattern, different phenomena that behaves very similarly and they can describe the same laws. It gets excited. I don't know. We are a bunch of nerds, but it's really important because, once you understand the formula behind, then you can say how these things behave. You can use the same equations and say, yeah, sound and light are very different, but they behave like a wave. So I can calculate the speed, I can calculate all the properties of a wave, I can tell you how much energy they carry, because it's the same formula. So this why it's very powerful to see this similarity. And power laws is one of the keys that allows us to make a lot of connections, because there are phenomena in nature, like how rivers form, how mountains grow. Like the other day, I was showing in my X account how there is this article that had a very beautiful graph of how teeth grow. Teeth grow in a power law. If I make a graph of the size of a tooth, and then time, how much time the animal is, for how long the animal is growing, for how long the tooth is growing, and I do a log of the size of a tooth and the log of time, right, of growth, it's a beautiful power law. And there are different power laws for different animals. So you can actually use it as a fingerprint. This animal has this slope, because there are different slope, right? If there are different lines, you will have a different slope, because that slope, it turns out to be the power. If you measure the slope, is actually the quantity they told you, right? The equation usually is like y equal the quantity x to the power, to the n. And that n is the slope of a straight line. And that n tells us a lot of information. I made a post the other day that was very, very popular, because I was explaining how if you look at metabolism and the size of the animal, you get again, a beautiful straight line for many different animals. And the fact that n is 3/4, it tells us a lot of things, And people can go on X and look at my post, or, we can spend a couple of minutes to explain if you are interested. But so this is the general idea of power law. They come up in nature many times as this relationship, very simple relationship, but it has a lot of consequences in terms of how things happen, how the metabolism of an animal works, how scaling and changing size when we grow, how planets move around. So many different things that are described by different simple laws. And it doesn't matter if it's simple. That is the other criticism. Oh, it's so simple. It's so silly. This is how nature likes it. Nature likes simple things, economical things. It's trying to do something in the most simple and direct and efficient way. It doesn't need to
And
be complicated.
Uh, and I totally get now the whole power law and how it's connected to nature. And when we now talk about Bitcoin and the power law, for me is the one question in mind, like there's the human side of things. Like what does happen when like Apple, for example, tomorrow comes out and says, we are now buying with all our reserves Bitcoin. I mean, it's unrealistic, but how does the human brain and the human factor work in this power law, and why does Bitcoin still follow this power law, and can there
Yes.
something break this power law in Bitcoin?
Okay, very good question. So, in general, let me answer why this power law actually come up in human behavior, because it's not just Bitcoin, right? So you will say, "Hey, Bitcoin is not a force of nature." I use this slogan that I know it's has its limitation, because it's not really a force of nature in the sense that it's something that comes from directly from the natural world. First of all, humans are part of the natural world, so it's still nature. How humans behave as a group, why not? And second, um, we find these power laws also in social phenomena. These again, famous Italian sociologist, economist. His name is Pareto. Probably you heard about him, right? For example, income distributions are, if you take how much a person has in terms of income, and you look at how many people have that type of income, and you organize them and so on, you get a power law, and it's called the Pareto distribution. He discovered there is a very precise, like you will say, how is possible, right? People probably have random salaries, etc. It's a human phenomenon, right? Maybe this country is different. Yeah, different countries will have different slopes, and again, you can use it almost like something specific for that country, almost like a fingerprint, but they still follow that. It's also called the rule of 80-20, because it turns out 80% of the people, sometimes, in some countries even worse, but 80% of the people, sorry, 20% of the people own 80% of the resources. And that happens in so many different phenomena, like, for example, in social media, 80% of the posts come from 20% of the people. This law tell us a lot of things. So you will think, how is possible that human beings behave in that way? In social media, people do whatever they want. They are free to do. Well, I'm not sorry. This is how it happens, because when people start to interact, etc., they follow certain laws. Why that happens? Well, it's much more complicated with human beings. We don't know exactly the interaction, etc., but somehow they organize themselves to create this law. And you can see them in how cities behave. Like, for example, this is something relatively new in the last maybe 20 years. There was, in particular, there is this physicist called Jeffrey West, and he has beautiful TED Talks. Maybe you can link it in your video, and also books and paper, of course, right? He's a scientist. He published a lot of, it's not just a scientist going around talking about stuff. You usually write papers, scientific, or the scientists analyze. So it's a very well accepted field. It's not just a random guy. It's an entire field of study where people look at cities, how city organized. For example, look at the number of gas stations. You will think the number of gas stations in a city, it's just random, right? This city has a little bit more, but these others are, fewer. Maybe, yes, it's proportional to the size of a city, but, I don't expect to see a very precise law. No, there is such a precise law. Same thing with income, same thing with patents that city produces, same thing with, hundreds of different type of things that you look, they are all organized as power law, power law, power law, almost to the point where, I made a joke and say, and, it's all about power law. It has been all about power law. Yeah, it is, a lot of things. And with Bitcoin, in a way, is surprising, because when you see it with your own eyes, because one thing is what the theory says, and the other, when you actually see it, it's amazing, because, first of all, it's there and it's undeniable. And second, you know, it's, you're thinking about, say, of course, because Bitcoin is a network, and networks, hold and behold, when you have interaction between different agents. This is how we call them in physics. Different things that interact with each other in different way, right? People that talk about Bitcoin, the miners, how the miners interact with the people that trade Bitcoin. It's a big interactive network, right? Literally, because there are all these nodes around the planet that are running the protocol, etc. Almost always, you see power laws expressing, and you can even go through the math and show that yes, you will see power laws, and then you say, well, but what if there is something big, like the ETF? What if Apple, like you say, right, it starts to adopt Bitcoin because they allow it to use it in their Apple store or whatever, Facebook adopts it, Elon Musk or whatever. It's usually these things do not change the behavior. Like in a city, you will say, well, what if in a city, and at a certain point, they invite a big corporation to come in, right? Remember there was a time when, I don't remember if it was Apple or some other big, maybe Google, they were looking for another headquarters, right? And where different city competing with each other. What if that city gets Google coming in the town? Will not that change everything, the dynamics of this power law? Really, usually not really, because what happens? The company moved there because the power law, what was at the right place, that to go to the next step needed something like Google to come in, right? It's almost like the power law attracts, because it's a sign of how evolved the city is, how wealthy the city is. Now, there are some exceptions. If a big company like Google come in a small little town, that creates some kind of big change, etc. And that also is part of the theory, how very dramatic changes can affect a network, right? But usually it's very rare. And this is why you see these power laws, because if it happens all the time, we will not see them, right? We'll see just disrupted power laws. Instead, usually it's the other way around. If a network is ready for the next big event, then that event comes. But for Bitcoin is a beautiful story, because if you think what happened, right, in these 15 years, in the beginning was nothing. It was just Satoshi and some crazy cryptographers, in a very small little corner of the internet doing their little things about hacking, white hacking, and thinking about cryptography and stuff like that. He created this thing. His friends, some were skeptical, some were supporting. They come together, they start to share ideas. Then Satoshi launched the code. Some people run it on their computer. They use some of their resources. They debug it. And this makes the network grow. More people hear about it. They come in. They started to trade it between themselves. Somebody buys a pizza with thousands of Bitcoin. All these events, right? Media start to talk about Bitcoin. So all these things are happening, and it's basically like a feedback loop, like this, right? So something happens, it brings the resources make the network work, go up and grow. That attracts more resources, and so on and so on. When you have effects like that we call them in physics, we call multiplicative, because you have something, then is multiplied by the effect of another, then is multiplied. So you have instead of summing things, you multiply them. That is exactly when you will expect a power law. This is why I'm saying to everybody, look, I'm not just drawing a stupid straight line through data. There is an entire philosophy, there is an entire understanding. If you get this principle, then you understand a lot of things of Bitcoin. It's almost like a key, like a lot of the question that you have about Bitcoin. What will happen with the ETF? My answer is nothing. You see, I'm very different from many people, because I'm saying this based on some principle that I could be wrong, and we will see what the data shows. But if this principle I am trying to be consistent with this principle, then I can answer all these questions. And you can actually make predictions. You can, for example, you can say, how many years are we going to wait before Bitcoin catches up with gold and becomes more valuable than all the gold on earth? Because of this principle, and because of these ideas, and because of the mathematical laws that governs Bitcoin, that seems to be true, I can make this prediction. See? So it's an entire philosophy, an entire understanding of a history of Bitcoin, of a future of Bitcoin, of a nature of Bitcoin. Once you understand it as a power law, first of all, if you like math, if you like, you know, principles, etc., it's so fantastic because, it's not a random asset. It's so weird. We have this incredible asset that for the first time in human history is not just random. It follows a very precise path, right? So it's a beautiful, interesting thing. Even if you are not interested in Bitcoin, just studying it and trying to understanding it, it's beautiful. There is no other way to describe it. If you like math and physics, etc., you find it beautiful. It's organized. So people resisted, but if I am right and this is true, the consequences are incredible, in terms of this social experiment. You can call it a social experiment, a physics experiment, because, we use energy, we transform energy to create this asset, to create value in the network. And so it's really fascinating and it's powerful.
It's for me still a fascinating thing to that Bitcoin follows models, and we have from the past we have the stock to flow model. I think this is something that is really popular in the Bitcoin scene. Lately, not that much, but it was really popular. Maybe it becomes again really popular, and all these models, and now also the power law. Tries to kind of predict where the price is going with different
Mm-hmm.
kinds of methods. The power law is really interesting because it's the first one for me, and I'm not a physicist. Have I'm a software developer, so I have not that much understanding of all that nature and all those methods. But as I understand, this is the first one that's like tied to nature, and for me, Bitcoin is also really tied to nature. And when I now ask the question to you, like, uh, how can we predict the price of Bitcoin? And if we now have the last 15 years as a record, where it follows the price model, the power law, where will Bitcoin stand in like 15 years? When will we break the 1 million US dollar barrier? And also another interesting question is that power law denominated in US dollar the same thing denominated in, I don't know, Zimbabwe dollar, Venezuelan dollars? Is there a difference in those kinds of smaller and even less powerful fiat currencies?
Very good questions. Okay, so one by one. So the first one about models. So yes, it's a great thing that actually you can study Bitcoin and try to make prediction. And actually, believe me, it's not just me and Plan B that are doing these things. Like with some kind of methodology, because of course, you can always draw a line, you can do TA, etc. And most of the time, it doesn't work because it's mostly based on humans trying to find patterns where they are not, because this is how we are programmed, right? It's a very good thing. We are kind of machines. We're trying to find pattern because these are what allows us to survive. But many times we do mistakes. We see, Jesus on toast. Like, oh, look at this. It looks like Jesus. Or you see something in the clouds. When there is nothing in the clouds. So people can do that, but if you have a methodology, then at least you are on something. Like for example, the S2F model, it had some value because it had some understanding of cause, like this is what makes the price goes up, this is the mechanism, the amount of bitcoins that are mined because of the halving event goes down by a factor of 2. So I'm thinking that this is what is going to happen. So I admire actually with I know it received a lot of criticism and people got disappointed, and I think it is what is happening also a little bit with my model, because people got tired and disappointed by S2F, and we are kind of resisting by telling everybody that actually we have cracked Bitcoin. We have a model that works. And I mean, if I show you a slide, some of the recent things we did, I think really I cracked it. It really behaves exactly like I'm saying it is behaving. And not just in the general trend, but even in all the different phases of a cycle. But you know this is how you do science. You come up with an hypothesis. Remember what I told you, Kepler tried many different things before he found the right thing. This is how you go. Like Edison, he was trying literally thousands of different materials for his light bulb, for the filament, and they were all failing until he found the right one. Tungsten, for example. So this is how you do science. You try, you explore, and it's beautiful that the Bitcoin is actually studied, because if you go online actually and you go on Scholar, where we have all the scholarly articles, you find really hundreds of papers on Bitcoin. People are studying it as a scientific topic. Maybe Bitcoiners are not aware of it, but actually they should. There are serious scientists that study Bitcoin. And in fact, there are even serious scientists that found power laws. Like I always mention all these one of my favorite financial physicists is actually pretty famous. His name is Soronet. He's a French scientist. And he actually published a couple of papers where it's all about power laws. He found actually one of the first power laws that they found was a power law that I found 4 years before, but I didn't publish a paper. Instead, I was silly and I wrote on Reddit. I should have published a paper instead of spending my time on Reddit and social media. But, this is how I did it. And they published the paper because usually, you cannot publish exactly the same thing that somebody else published unless you make an improvement or something. But, they didn't know about my work because, it's on Reddit. And so they don't read Reddit. They are serious scientists. They're not like me that I'm playing with kids and, talking about. It's fun. It's fun and I like it. It's also educational, but it's okay. But just to tell you, right, it's a scientific topic. Power laws came about with Bitcoin before serious scientists mentioned them. We didn't mention the specific one that I mentioned, that is time itself being a power law with price. And so, the beauty of doing something in time is that if you're right and your equation, you come up with an equation of how Bitcoin develops in time, then I can plug in that equation any future time, right? And so this is how I can make a prediction. I have an equation that describes the behavior. Now, you have to understand what it means. In this case, for example, we're looking at the median price, the kind of the average price of Bitcoin, right? We are not trying to predict exactly where it is day by day, but in average, where the price is going. And again, remember the emphasis on scale. We are not caring about, is it 50,000 or 53,000? To me, it's the same thing, because remember, I want to focus on how the price scales up, right? So is it 50,000 or 100,000? Is 10 or 50 is in between. So, okay. So, but, it's much more precise than that. But in general, we are trying to understand how we go to the next level of 10. Does it take 5 years? Does it take 10 years? Does it take 100 years? That is this entire thing about power laws. It's the focus on scale. So, there are many differences between S2F and the power law. Of course, I believe that power laws are more powerful. Me and Plan B are talking. We want to do at a certain point like a public debate, where we discuss the pros and cons. I admire him, and I think he's great. I think it got too much negative publicity when his model didn't work because people got disappointed. There was some controversy there. I think he was, at a certain point, maybe got excited and he was kind of hyping, what was going to happen, because his model is very optimistic. This is basically an exponential. So every 4 years, according to his model, we go up by a factor of 10. And, so this cycle, for example, S2F predicts basically we are going close to 1 million. My prediction, right, because you were kind of asking what my model predicts, is more like 210,000 for the cycle. It's much more sober. It's much more, because there is growth, but one of the messages, because there are a lot of messages associated with the power law, is that it takes longer and longer for Bitcoin to grow. Most of the very fast growth happened in the beginning, and now we are slowing down. And everybody kind of see that, right? Because we don't see that explosive growth. It's the same growth, right? Strangely enough, because it has to do with size. The analogy is this: if it took, let's say, 100 days for Bitcoin to go from $1 to $10. Next step to go from 10, what did they say, from 10 to $100, right? To go from 100 to 1,000, so it's a next step of 10, it takes a proportional amount of time. So instead of 100 days, it's going to take 1,000 days. So we're talking about years, right? Because thousands of days is kind of almost like 3 years, right? So this is the idea that to go to the next step, it takes longer and longer and longer. So, for example, how long is going to take to reach 1 million? Well, it's going to take 2033. That is what the calculation of a model says. We should reach 1 million around 2033. Now, if S2F is right, because this cycle actually, we will see if S2F is completely wrong, because it looked kind of wrong last cycle, but this time, this new cycle, will really decide between all these models. And again, it's something that happens in science. As you get more data, some of the old models die, and it's almost like a battle of the models. Some model gets put aside because they were wrong, like the Earth being the center of the universe, it turned out not to be true. We went to the heliocentric model, right? So as you get more data and more information and knowledge, many different models can be excluded, So I think this is what will happen with this new cycle and S2F. I think his model is wrong, mostly because the exponential growth doesn't look like what is Bitcoin is doing. And also, you know what? Again, because all this is a philosophy, power laws are associated with something that is stable, that is strong, that is anti-fragile. You do it something to it, it wants to go back to where it was before. So I prefer to work that Bitcoin really follows a power law, because even if it takes longer for us to go, to millions of dollars, it shows that the system is robust, is strong, is going to last for a long, long time. And things that move exponential, they don't. They usually go fast, and then they crash, or something really dramatic happens to them. So, we will see, because whatever Bitcoin does, whatever Bitcoin does, right? I cannot force it to do a certain thing. But, again, I think that power law gives us a completely different perspective. S2F is part, and by the way, I'm doing model much, much earlier than Plan B. I started this in 2012 all the way. So, it's not that I'm trying to copy what Plan B is doing with something different. I'm doing this much earlier than him. But, like I say, I think there is so much more interesting principle, ideas, and they are all consistent. And all, even this idea of time, for example, that we have to wait for good things to come, right? So you read the Bitcoin standard, right? And remember that there is that concept of preference, time preference, right? And there is the idea that it's a good thing to wait, for gains and for good things to happen, right? And so I make a joke all the time that it's actually, for Bitcoin, it's not preference time, but preference log time, right? Because I'm taking the log of time. So it's kind of a joke, but it makes you think about what is beyond that. If you care about this system, and we want to support the network, and for us, it's a tool for freedom, etc. We want it, like a plant, that is growing with its own patterns and is going stronger and stronger, instead of being selfish and want that Bitcoin goes up like an exponential and we make millions very quickly. I'd rather hope that Bitcoin, it's like that kid that waits for the cookies, that is taking his time and say, okay, I'm going to wait, because now I'm going to get 2 cookies instead of 1, right? So you see how the philosophy changes. We are almost like opposite in a way, S2F and the power law. There are like 2 different models that say different things, all opposite things.
Yeah, I like your approach to it, because it seems like connected to something real. It seems like low time preference. It seems like not a hype model where you like predict, oh, at this date the price will be at 1 million. It's like No, we're having a power law, and this is what it seems like. And you also mentioned it in the beginning somewhere that there can be exceptions. Like, for example, I don't know, in in the COVID area, actually, it happened in Germany where the company who was doing the manufacturing of the COVID vaccines, that was in a smaller town, and they're now bringing in so many taxes because of one event. Like, probably this is something, it's a little bit of an exception to like something like a power law. But as Bitcoin also grows, it seems like exceptions to the power law can be happen, not as fast. Like, the more Bitcoin grows, the harder it gets for it to break. Like, like in the
Exactly. So very
beginning
good.
when
You started to be a fellow physicist. You're starting to think like a physicist. This is good. This is why I wish everybody study physics. They should. It's a martial. I call it sometimes the martial art of science. It really trains you. We have even experiment that show that when students take physics classes, their brain changes because it's so different from thinking from everything else. You start to see patterns. You start to reason in a very systematic way. You say, okay, yeah, great, yeah, like you did right now. You say, yeah, the system is bigger, and I'm talking about some kind of feedback loop of action reaction. Of course, it's going to go slower because it takes much more to go from 100,000 to a million. Uh, and also exceptions will not be so important. There will be little. Uh, there will be some reaction, but it will not be as dramatic as before. And we see that we see in so many things, even these bubbles. These times when after the halving, the price goes away actually from the power law. It's I that again, I try to be consistent with my philosophy. I see it almost what a physicist call like a perturbation. It's like you have like a branch of a tree, but it stays there, it's stable, and then I go and hit it, and what it does, it starts to vibrate, right? And then little by little, because of the frictions inside the tree and the fibers inside the tree, they create friction, it loses that amplitude and it goes back to where it was before. And so that is exactly what happened with Bitcoin, because if you see what happens with the bubble, I can show you again in one of the graphs, you see the response to the halving, the price goes up like crazy, and then it reaches the top and it goes back, and you know where it goes? Exactly along the trajectory of the power law. It goes back there. How does it do it? I don't know, but it does it. It's a fact. It's there in the graph. It's a scientific thing, and it shows that the system is robust. It's yes, it can react to changes, but it then goes back to equilibrium. Same thing with physiology. If I run, my heartbeat will go up. It's kind of a perturbation in the system. But then, because what is called homeostasis, the system wants to go back to equilibrium. You see, again, this understanding of Bitcoin as a power law also allows you to understand how the cycles work. It's all consistent. It's all part of the story, and it's not like a little BS story, that I'm making up. It's all based on data. It's all based on science. It's all based on. Now, could I be wrong? Yes, because some of these things that maybe I see, maybe are not there, but this, we have a tool now to go and answer this question in a more scientific way, and understanding Bitcoin as this kind of process that follows a power law. So yeah, and can that happen in the future in Bitcoin? It could happen. Maybe there is some disastrous event. Like and sorry if I kind of skip a question. You were talking about different currencies. So what happened? I didn't do it yet because I'm doing so many things and coming up with so many ideas. I spend almost all my day doing these graphs because it doesn't look like it takes time, but it does. You have to code, you have to understand, you have to adjust the graph, to make it nicer and to make it look more understandable for people. So it takes a long time for me to work on this. I'm very excited. I cannot wait to wake up and work and see how people like it and how they respond. It's really interesting. It's the love of my life right now, But I didn't do the currencies because there were other things. The dollar is really a good way because we're talking about value. Most people in the world use still the dollar as a currency. It's very stable. Inflation is relatively small. It will be interesting to see how it behaves with different currency, but it's really, I don't know what we could learn from that. Besides, okay, this currency crazy, and maybe the power law is not there anymore when you have a very inflationary currency. I will do it because it's interesting and it should be done, but I don't know yet. I saw some graphs that other people show of how crazy it looks. Like looks almost exponential, but see at that point it's not power law anymore. I mean, it's not Bitcoin anymore. It's really the currency that is losing value in an almost exponential fashion. So that effect dominates over the growth of Bitcoin itself. It looks like Bitcoin is growing, but really it's the currency that is losing value. That is what Bitcoin does. It makes your stupid currency look like crazy if you traded in Bitcoin, right? But I don't know if there is really a pattern there. We can look at it, but my guess is that it's dominated by the currency losing value. With dollar, it's a small correction. In fact, the other day I posted because I say this many times: a small correction, small correction. But I really didn't show a graph, and then finally I show a graph, and you can see from that graph in my Reddit post that it basically almost didn't change at all. While if you do the same thing with SP500, for example, in an equivalent amount of time, it lost almost half of its value. So it's already not much because, like in the last, almost like 20 years, SP500 went up like 4 times, and it seems, oh, maybe it's it's not nothing for Bitcoin because Bitcoin goes up a factor of 4 in sometime in a few months, but um, for a normal investment seems a lot, but you have to cut it enough because you lost half of it because of inflation. So it's really dominant with things like SP500, almost like you're basically catching up with inflation. You're not really making a ton of money. You are basically preserving your money against inflation. That is not what investment should be about, right? It should not just be about holding something because you beat inflation, but to create wealth, because basically you're saving and you're not doing all the things you would like to do with the money because you want the future reward. But if a future reward is, hey, I just fought inflation, it's really sad, and it tells everything, right? In our philosophy of Bitcoin, that we are against printing money, and we all the time complain about inflation, etc. These things that keeps us like slaves. You look at that graph that I just posted, you see it directly with your eyes. Look at this. I invested in SP500. It's supposed to be this incredible investment for 20 years, and I barely beat inflation by a little bit, While Bitcoin, you are plotting the same graph, Bitcoin looks like this, like really tens of thousands better than SP500, better than gold, better than anything. It looks like you look at the graph, you say, what the heck is happening here? It doesn't even look real, It's crazy.
I'm super excited to announce that this podcast got the first ever sponsor. 21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. Maybe it's now a good time to actually look at the graphs you mentioned
Yes.
in the while we talked, and now answer like all the questions like how is the graph coming along, what's the power of the Bitcoin power law,
Yeah.
and where we are going, and maybe we can also see like, okay, when should we cross you said 210,000 for this cycle, so like 210,000 in the next 1-2 years.
Yes. And can you see my screen?
I can see the screen. Yes, bitboyside.com.
And yeah, this is actually my company. So I have a company and I have a goal of a company. And so let me see if I can actually make it as a presentation. Last slideshow. So I should click here on the on the PowerPoint. I'm so fixated with power laws. Okay, from the beginning. All right. And now you see it as a presentation,
yes, now
right?
I see the slides. Yeah.
Yeah. So my site is called Poseidon, and you guys can go there and sign up. We have like a little box where you can put your email. We are planning to send regular newsletters, to update people, so you can actually see it at your own leisure instead of following me also on Twitter. This is my Twitter, by the way. I know if this is a crazy name. I didn't know that you actually could use your own tailored name, and because so many different places now link to these, different interviews that I did, etc. I decided not to change it, at least for now. So just paste and copy, and I know it's a long name, but come and see our discussions on Twitter.
Mhm.
And this site, what this site is about, we are developing an app actually, because we want to help investors, and the app will, you basically decide what is your style if you're a hodler, because this approach can also be used by hodler, because basically it's telling you, look, this is a good time to do DCA, do it very aggressively because the price is very low. We are oversold relatively to this general trend. Here is not such a good idea. Just wait a little bit until you get actually a lower price. So even an order can use. Or if you want to be aggressive, where maybe you want to multiply your Bitcoin and you want to risk, where you want to sell maybe 10% of your Bitcoin, 20%, 50%, is something that is called rebalancing, right? You sell the asset that is doing very well, to get the one that is not doing. And then because of a cycle, you can rebuy Bitcoin at a lower price. So this app is going to help you with that. You decide how you want to play the game, and then it's basically doing the buy and selling for you, all automated. Of course, you can check what it's doing, the performance, you can control it. But many people, have busy lives, so they don't want to look at a chart all day long. So this app can do it for you automatically. So sign up. We are going to do beta testing very soon. So you can be part of a beta testing if we sign up. And so this is the first graph I wanted to show you. So basically, this is what I say all the time. This is basically what they show on CNBC and all these financial media. They always talk about how Bitcoin went up like crazy and then it crashed and it looks messy. Like if you look at this graph, it doesn't look there is a pattern at all, right? It looks like, yeah, maybe it's generally going up. We have this going up recently, right, in the last year. But if you, for example, if we just went through a bear market, it looks sad, right? Oh, we reached 60,000, now we crash to 16s, and it's the hand of Bitcoin. It's horrible. This is what they usually show. I never saw them showing a log graph, for example, where so in this chart, what you see in this chart is called a linear chart, because the time, in this case, what I'm showing are the days, how many days are passed by since the creation of Bitcoin. So what we call the Genesis block. This is why we have 0, have a Genesis block when Bitcoin was created. Then, these are the number of days from that event, right? And basically here is where we are today. I think I did this chart like 3 or 4 days ago. And here on the y-axis, we see the price. I know it's in this scientific notation that some people are not familiar, but we're talking about every mark here is basically 10,000, right? So we have on top 70,000, 60,000, and so on, because 10 to the 4 here means 10,000. And then, if you do this chart, that many people are familiar because it looks kind of like, that rainbow chart that everybody's familiar. The rainbow chart actually is based on the work of this guy that is called Trollolo. I would like to meet him one day somewhere in the Bitcoin universe, because I don't think he understood completely what he was dealing with, because he doesn't use the word power law. It comes up with a method that is a little bit cumbersome, but his big intuition was, I think we should plot Bitcoin. But it's not, a big deal, because whenever you have something that changes by factor of 10, like it happened with Bitcoin. And remember, he did this around 2014, so we were here, when we didn't have a lot of data, and he decided to plot the graph on what is called a log linear. So log in the y-axis, but still linear in the y-axis. Sorry, in the x-axis. The time is linear. That is what most people are familiar with. And so when you do that, even at that time, it looked like there was some kind of a pattern. And he was trying to say to people, I think I see here something. It looks like, and that was one of the things I was trying to describe. He had a very, very good intuition. So even if he didn't have a language of a physicist, to call it a power law, he understood that scaling was important. So, and the scaling was in the y-axis. He was focused on how Bitcoin changes in the y-axis. And he say, look, when I go from $0 to $1, and so you see here is log. So what this means, when it's log 0, we are talking about $1, because 10 to the 0 is $1, 10 to the 1 is $10, 10 to the 2 $100, $1,000, and so on, right? This is what these numbers represent, is the exponent of these dollar prices. So he, when he did it in that way, he started to say, see, guys, I'm looking at how long it takes for Bitcoin to go from, from $0 to $1 to, from $1 to $10, from $10 from $100, and so on. And it looks like it's taking longer and longer time. He had a very beautiful graph with all the time that it took to do that. And he also projected in the future, because he wanted to see what happened in the future. So he is kind of a grandfather of this idea, right? So because this is also how you do science. It's not a question, I was the first, you were the second. Many people come together and everybody has their own little contribution, right? This is how many scientific fields develop. It was, Kepler, and then Newton, and then, and Galileo at the start, they all contributed something for science to move along. So same thing with the history of Bitcoin. People started to notice there were very precise regularities, right? I was also active at that time in this field. I was making my own charts. I was already talking about power laws, but I was more focused. I cared about the price, but I was also, the power laws that I was finding were with addresses, with hash rate, with transition. I didn't look at the price directly, if the price directly was a power law, because I thought it was like kind of a two-step process. First, you find the power law, let's say, between addresses and price, and then if you know how addresses change, you can then do the second step and say how price change, right? So it was like a two-step process. And so I was like working there. I heard about Trololo's model. He was fitting a non-linear fit, because this is also the other thing that he saw. Remember, he was for here around 2014. It doesn't look very curved, right? If you just focus up to 2014, it kind of looks almost like a straight line. And a straight line in this type of graph is what is called an exponential. So many people were saying that Bitcoin was an exponential. And if it was an exponential, imagine I draw a straight line just here from the beginning to 2014, and I continue that straight line, it will be already a million several years ago. But he didn't do that, right? So he was right in his intuition, because actually the math, because he applied what is called a regression, but basically it's a mathematical tool to find, is there, like basically is answering this question, is there some kind of a curve there that seems to explain the behavior of Bitcoin? And he came up with a log, that the answer was a log, that the log of price seemed to change with the log of time. And I was kind of silly because if I saw that and I immediately have recognized, but okay, basically you found a power law, right? This is a cumbersome way of finding a power law because there is a much more straight way. And what I want to say, one more thing about this chart, you see, even the non-experienced mathematician or physicist looks at this chart and all of a sudden it doesn't look that random anymore, right? It follows a very nice, beautiful arc. It seems to go up, right? Maybe slowing down, right? Because it's curved, it's not straight. If it was an exponential, remember, it will look like a straight line in this kind of graph. The linear graph, an exponential looks like a hockey stick. It goes very, very fast. But in a graph like this, looks a straight line. This is not an exponential, so it looks curved. So it means it's growing, but it's growing slower than an exponential, right? And it's now stopping because this thing, in theory, it's like a parabola. It's a very because remember I told you that we can extract the exponents when we do this calculation, and the exponent for Bitcoin is 5.82. So it looks basically like a parabola, right? Because we know what a parabola looks like, y equal x squared. But instead of having the square, we are having a number that is almost close to 6. So you can imagine how fast it's going. So when we're talking about slowing down, it's still a very fast process. It's slowing down relatively to an exponential. But so I was telling you, there is a much more, and these stars are the halvings, right? So we can see some other regularities in this chart. Like every time there is an halving, it seems there is like some kind of event where we call them bubble. The price goes up, shoots up, reaches the top, and then it comes down, right? But you see how nicely, because differently from Trollol, etc., this chart is also based on the power law. Because I did one step that I will show you in a moment, and then everything looks much more regular when you do that. See, so even in this chart, you can start to see that it doesn't look that random. And people were already pointed out, but they didn't really love the language of a power law, because to me that is how things start to be so clear, first of all, and then it's not anymore fitting a line. It's an entire philosophy of Bitcoin and, in fact, life. So, and that is here. Look, this is revealed by this graph. So for a moment, forget about the oscillations here, because this is what I added on top. Say, okay, besides doing this, is also oscillating. But so if you forget about the oscillations, you can see that something magical happened. Look, curve, straight line, right? It looks like a straight line. And you say, well, there are these deviations. Yeah, a straight line with some deviations where, like I told you before, look what happened here. It deviates, it goes up, then what? After, and how does Bitcoin knows to do that? It comes back and look what it does. It follows the power law. It follows the bottom. It is parallel to the trend, and it stays within this channel that is like a deviation from that general trend. The general trend is the orange line. So that is kind of a middle ground. And then you have these regularities like, oh, it looks like it goes down to some kind of a deviation, so like a very fixed deviation. It turns out it's about 60% from the trend, and then it stays there. And so I did it also before, you see, and here a little bit, this actually, by the way, is COVID, this little dip here that you see, in this, in the cycle after. This is like this is the last cycle, this is the previous one, like in 2018, then we had the COVID. And during the COVID, the price went back, to that general bottom trend, right? But it stayed a little bit above, right? But I don't know, maybe there were things, right? These are some of there are regularities, and then there are like little exceptions. But in general, again, the general pattern is followed. And after the last cycles, again, we see the same thing. The price stays there in this green band, right? That represents like a range of different percentages from the general trend, right? In the legend, you can see 20%, 40%, and so on. So all of a sudden, when I saw these, with my training of plotting power laws, and some of them, believe me, are not perfect like the planets. They look ugly. Like if you do, for example, with addresses, it looks much more disorderly, right? But there is still a general trend there where you can say, look, it it doesn't look completely random. It follows a precise pattern. It's a power law. And then, you can actually do this calculation that is a regression that is finding a straight line. And many people say, oh, so you did a regression. What is the big deal? It's not a big deal because most people that have like some basic mathematics skills know how to do regression, and the computer can do for you. The point is recognizing that there is something very organized, very structured, that is very unlikely for an asset to behave in this way. And in particular, the other thing that I always remind to the critics of, oh, you just did a straight line in a graph, it is silly. You are silly if you say that, because look at this. My Italian passion comes out. We went through orders of magnitude. This thing went from being few cents all the way to almost 100,000. And through all these, it behaved in this regular fashion. This cannot happen by chance, okay? No scientist will look at these and tell you this happens by chance. In fact, this Kruger person, he's like one of the very active Bitcoin accounts. And from what I understand, I like his post, etc. He's a very smart guy. He has a PhD from Stanford in math. You look at this graph. I don't know why he didn't find it before, but he looked at the graph and he commented, this is amazing. Bitcoin goes through an unstoppable power law. He understood it. Anybody with any basic understanding of math and physics and a little understanding of science and intelligence immediately says, this is interesting. This is weird. And if you do it with other assets, they don't look like that. SP500 doesn't look like that. Gold doesn't look like that. Just Bitcoin. And so, when I discovered these, it's not something completely new. There was Trololo, there were other people, but the new thing was, this is a power law. And everything changes all of a sudden, because now you have all these other tools that come together in trying to interpret what Bitcoin does, that we already discussed, right? And so, this was an example that I was telling you before. This is a paper where, we got also, and at a certain point we were all, when actually S2F came about, there were all these economists coming out, some of, probably students or maybe some PhDs, etc. They were debating about the validity of S2F, but also because there was like this soft, I think he's a computer scientist. He came out, very, very clever guy. He saw my paper, not my paper, my Reddit post, because that was my mistake to publish on Reddit. He saw my post, and he, like being a smart guy, immediately was convinced. This is striking. And he started to post a bunch of Medium articles. His name is H.C. Berger, and he popularized this model, and it became not as famous as S2F, but it became kind of almost the competition, and people were putting it down, like these economists were attacking it, and some of them started to make fun of us that we are taking the log of time, because you see how weird it looks, all these dates bunching up. What these dates bunching up means is, because we are taking the log of time, that it takes longer and longer and longer time for the price to go up by a factor of 10. This is what it means. You have to understand what is going on and come up with the right interpretation. But because these economists are not used to take the log of time of an asset, they got confused. And one of them in particular was telling us, it's absurd, it doesn't make any sense. It means that time is accelerating. It doesn't mean that time is accelerating. It's simply a way of showing that if you focus on scale, both the price and the time scale in a similar fashion. We call it in physics, we use this term, a scale invariant. Invariant means it doesn't change. So if I go from 10 to 100 to 1,000, it does the same thing, because a straight line means a regular, a consistent pace of change, right? So the same thing here. So you can understand what is happening here in this graph. They have time. Oh, look at these weird guys, these weirdos that are taking the log of time. We do it all the time in science. I don't know why economists don't know that. So it took the time that it takes for the tooth to grow, right? In this case, years. And why this is a log graph? Do you see how the weird scaling? First of all these, they are not equally spaced. That is a sign we are looking at the log. And also you see how it grows by factor of 10, right? 10, 50, and so on. And same thing in the x-axis. So when you do something like that, that is the main tool, one of the main tools. It's a trick. If that is another thing, people that don't understand math, I see on the social media, they say, he manipulated the chart. I mean, it's silly, but at the same time, because we are dealing with a lot of people that don't know math, it makes me sad if they say things like that. Which kind of manipulator? It's called a transformation. We do this all the time in physics to show patterns that were not visible when you have a normal type of graph. The fact that this behavior looks like a straight line and a log-log graph is significant. It means that is a power law. It's one of the ways to recognize it easily because our eyes are trained to look for a straight line. It doesn't mean that you're just basing all your understanding on using your eyes. You then first use your intuition. You look, there is a straight line. It looks like a straight line. Yes, a little bit tilted, maybe in the beginning, but, it really follows kind of like a straight line. So it can be irregular. It doesn't have to be always perfect. But the scientists say it's look like a power law, yeah, with some deviations, of course, because it's still kind of a random process. But it's significant because when I can come up with all kind of interesting properties by looking at the exponent, there are ways of thinking and understanding. I can see that different animals have different lines. So, this animal, the tooth grows faster. Why? What is going on in that animal? Why that happens? There are so many things that you can understand and extrapolate by doing this trick. We do it all the time. It's like part of doing science. Okay. So this is very interesting, and this is an example. But look at this. There are tons of other examples all over the place. These are for example, I have body mass, right? And here a metabolic rate. And so I was telling you before, right? Let me try to summarize what I was planning in the post. The beauty of this graph, right? First of all, look at all these different animals in this graph where they all follow. How the bull knows where the goose is going to be, or the dog, and they're all organized, even the man and the woman. The woman, look at the woman. So, there are many things to learn from a graph like this. Like, for example, besides saying, oh, it's a power law, you can say why the woman is just below the man, right? Well, it seems the man, for example, given the same body mass, if you take a woman and a man with the same body mass, in average, men consume more energy. So actually, women are more efficient, right? So women are more efficient in how using the energy, maybe because when they became pregnant, they have to save energy. So, or maybe men need to do like a big efforts, to hunt, etc. So in evolution, we change a little bit. Like when I say men and women are the same, no, because this graph shows you that at least from a metabolic point of view, we are not. There is a difference, an important difference, and you can actually start to understand a lot of things by just looking at the graph. The other thing I was explaining is that the slope, this is why the slope is so important, is 3/4. That means that is less than 1. And what that is the consequence of that? Well, that means that every time I make the animal bigger and bigger, so, you will think I'm making the animal 2 times bigger. It's going to consume 2 times the energy. No, because it's the size of the animal. This graph means simply that how much energy you're consuming is your mass to the power of 3/4, right? So if I take 2 to the 3/4, I don't remember exactly by heart, but something like 1.6. So it's not quite 2. So that means there is some kind of economy of scales, right? So if I triple the animal, it's not going to be 3 times the energy, it's going to be 2.3, let's say. I cannot do that in my head, but if you do it with the calculator, take the power of 3 to the power of 3/4, you don't get 3, you get something less than 3. That means as the animal scales up, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, it's more efficient in using the energy. Do you see how many things we can learn from a power law? You see why scientists are fascinated by them? Because just by deriving that little power, we can say so many things about the phenomena that we're studying, and also looking at the details of a chart, and so on and so on and so on. Then we can think about, okay, what is causing this? Why we see this 3/4? Why is not 5/7? What is going on? Let's try to study and understand how that number comes about, and so on. You see, it happens everywhere in languages. Like, look how a language is organized. This is how many times a word appears in a language. All with, like, what Latin and Japanese have anything to do with each other? Well, they follow power law. And every language, see, these are different colors represent different languages, but yeah, there will be differences, but they all kind of stay on top of each other. They seem to follow a very precise pattern. Same thing with cities. You see, here I show cities, different nations, right? And different cities. The different lines here represent a different city. So it depends on how big the city and how it behaves, etc. And so there are very precise quantities. Whatever I'm looking at, it could be how the city is growing and whatever. These different type of parameters. Like I say, it works with number of jobs, gas stations, whatever, television stations, and in a city, they all follow power laws, and the planets that we mentioned, right? And these are just few examples. There are literally hundreds. And look, right, when you compare it with everything, look again, Bitcoin, it follows, like, the general trend looks a straight line. So Bitcoin is also power law, and it follows between all these things. It's incredible. It's like, if this is true and it continues to be true, it's probably one of the most fundamental, interesting things about Bitcoin. But for the first time in human history, we have an asset that doesn't behave like an asset, random, and it goes up, it goes down, etc. It does locally, but the general trend over many, many, many orders of magnitude, like, basically going from being a mouse all the way to being an elephant, it follows the general power law pattern. It's extraordinary. And if you are not seeing these, I'm sorry for you. I'm very sorry for you. You don't like science, you don't understand science. And it's sad, because it's a beautiful thing, understanding all these. That there are patterns in life and in Bitcoin, So, and then, this is what I was telling you before. Other scientists, they again, sometimes they criticize me. Even to the other day, there is this Reddit post that, I don't know, has to be like the saddest place on the internet. Is called Batcoin, right? BUTT coin.
Yeah.
Because these people are, I'm sorry to use the word, but literally idiots. Because when I was talking to them in 2012 when Bitcoin was $9, and you could still think it was a tulip, etc. But 15 years later, they say the same thing, is a tulip, etc. So you're really an idiot, because it's not, right? And right now, if you invest in Bitcoin instead of being stupid on the internet, you could be a millionaire, because it went up thousands of times. And these people continue to say some bullshit, and they were making fun of my model. And I was telling them, look, go and make fun of the Sornet, that is one of the most famous physicists in the world, in the financial area of physics. And he wrote entire books on how to predict crashes in the stock market. This guy is famous if you are in the field. And they wrote a paper with a co-author where they had power laws in Bitcoin. So you're saying that I'm silly to make little regression lines. Well, that is exactly what we did. We took the market cap, we took the active users. By the way, I had a graph like that on Reddit 4 years before them. And this is why, they were not aware of my work, because I published on Reddit instead of a paper, but I did it 4 years before that. And I showed this, right? See, I told you that the data look messy, because, of course, there is some randomness, right? But in general, you can see there is a very general pattern that can be explained by a power law. These guys do a regression in a log graph. You can make fun of them. They publish a paper. You didn't. These are professional scientists. You are not. So maybe they are right. So, and then you can actually take this law. Do you remember that I was telling you the 2-step process, right? This is what I was trying to do. I was looking at the addresses. In fact, I had a Reddit post called Metcalfe law compared with zip law, etc. There are different type of power laws, and I was making the comparison and say Bitcoin kind of follows in between. It's neither zips and neither Metcalfe. It looks like something in between. So I was making all this reasoning by looking at this relationship. So basically, what this article is about, and this article is published in a peer-reviewed journal. Other scientists look at it, they agreed, it's amazing. Okay, you can go ahead and publish, and and they had like a kind of a prediction of the price of Bitcoin. It is kind of basically what I'm saying. It's a very regular pattern that is based on a power law, right? I did it 4 years before them. They arrived to the same conclusion, So it's good when other scientists kind of support your work, that say, yeah, you are on the right path, this is how you do science, So it's not just this crazy physicist. It's just I'm trying to say I did it before many other people, even if I didn't do it in the right platform. And also, I don't care about who did it first. It's just amazing that, so this is the education part of it, actually is true. And Bitcoiner should be aware. And not just Bitcoiner, CNBC should be aware. Kramer should be aware. Everybody will talk about Bitcoin. You cannot talk about Bitcoin unless you realize that Bitcoin doesn't behave like a normal asset. So don't talk about your normal way of analyzing asset. You should understand power laws. You should understand that it's different, that it behaves in a very regular fashion, and is stable. And I know it's weird because people are not used to this, right? To think that there is an asset that you invest in it and you know what it's going to do 10 years from now. It sounds weird, but it is like this. And these are other graph that we did. Like, for example, we did like other things. Other people say, oh, but you didn't do all very deep statistical analysis to show that is a power. We did a lot of different, and these were, for example, I work with Burger, where we wrote different articles. We should write actually real scientific paper. That is my next step. I want to put all this together and write in a paper. But we did a lot of analysis to show that, what this graph is trying to show, like one question is, what if I did this model 5 years ago? What if I did it 6 years ago? What if I did 10 years ago? Will I get a similar value for the n, right, for the slope, etc., and how much the price is changing relatively to the trend, etc. So you can do all kinds of different analyses, and our conclusion after we did all this analysis that it seems to follow this pattern. All the statistic points to being stable and consistent, etc., and it's not a fluke. So we did all the homework, right? And so then if you go back, because I show you the graph where Bitcoin looks like a straight line, but once you look at it, and once every few days you should go back and look at the graph, in particular when you're worried and about Bitcoin behavior, look at the graph and remember that it's following this trend, right? We still like this more linear graph, right? It's easier for us to think in at least the time to be linear. So you can always go back and show how that straight line looks in this graph. It doesn't look like a straight line, but curve. But now I use all that knowledge that I gained from that chart to make a model. So I added other components, right? Because beside the general trend, we also have these bubbles, right? Very regular bubbles. And so I say, okay, can I add these components to my model? We do that all the time in physics. It's almost like modular. You start with a very simple little toy model, and then you add more complications, right? When you study, for example, a fall of an object, you first discard the friction of the air, right? The resistance of the air. And then you say, okay, now that we understand how a free falling body works in vacuum, let's add air and see how it behaves. We do that in physics all the time. We add little components to the model. So here what I did, I added the kind of periodic behavior around the bubbles. I also, remember we observe that most of the time during the bear market, the price seems to go down to this about 60% deviation from the trend. So I also, I wrote this code to say, okay, let's force the price to go there when, when we are in bear markets. And then I added, like I say, I added these sine kind of waves, like to show where the bubbles are. And also because we see these, we call it, diminishing returns. Basically, the deviation from the bottom to the top, if you measure the distance from the bottom to the top for each cycles, it becomes smaller and smaller, right? You can kind of see it with your eyes. And then I kind of actually measure it. It turns out even that is very regular. It looks like an exponential, but instead of going up, it's an exponential that is going down. So it's going down pretty fast. And so I included that in the model. I included that change as measured from these three peaks. And this is why when you go in the future, you see how these bubbles are smaller and smaller, because I kind of try to mimic this decrease in the size of the bubbles and projected in the future. How that, if it continues to be like that and it continues to be regular, how that will look in the future. So I put all this, and plus you see it's a little wiggly, this black line, because I also put some of the noise, right? It's not on a daily basis. It's changing a little bit. I put actually the real noise that you observe on Bitcoin, right? So of course it's much more regular, because these models, the entire idea of a model is that they are always simpler than the things they want to describe, right? Because if I put so many elements to the model, where it's basic, is also called overfitting, because you're thinking that it's behaving like this, you're adding all these extra pieces, and then you're actually wrong. So it's usually a good idea to keep the model as simple as possible. And here there are three simple little additions, and when you put them together, they really doesn't look like a very nice fit. To you tell me, you think it's a nice representation, right? Simplifications
Yeah.
of Bitcoin behavior over time. It fits almost like a glove, right? There are some exceptions, like here, for example, right, in the last cycle, just before the last cycles. But in general, it looks very pretty fit, right? Pretty nice fit. And so then you say, okay, let's say that it continues to behave in that way. Let's project it in the future, because these are all equations of time. So I can plug in future times and then see how it develops in the future. And so we will see, right? Is it going to do that? We will see. It will be really nice, right? Maybe in 6 months from now, 1 year from now, we can have another talk and we can compare, right? And see how it looks like. And so it looks like, this is what it's going to do. And if it's going to do that, then we can tell what the price will be during the peak. I already told you it's going to be around 210,000. Then you see the nice thing that is going down. And then when it's going down, it's reaching this bottom. I think I calculated it's going to be around 60,000. So we're not going to see anything below 60,000 ever in the history of Bitcoin. And so we'll continue until in 2033, we're going to be 1 million. And again, if Bitcoin does what it did for the last 15 years, it's basically unavoidable. It's going to happen. And we can tell even when. So, this is the beauty of this model. Am I right? Am I wrong? We will see. This is how you do science. You make an hypothesis. This is nothing else than a scientific hypothesis. The data, and people even heard other non-scientific people that want to use scientific language and don't know what they're talking about, say, the model is not falsifiable. It's very falsifiable. Right? You want a model to be falsifiable, because if you make an hypothesis and the data is not right, the data doesn't show that your model, it can really predict the future behavior. And by the way, again, I want to respond also to the people who say the past doesn't predict the future. What else will you use to predict the future? The past is that, with asset, usually that doesn't work very well. But with very regular, almost, natural law type of phenomena like Bitcoin, yes, this is exactly what you do. You take the past, you look at what happened in the past, and you project it in the future. This is how we do science. This is how we know that there will be an eclipse in this given time, right? And so, so I made this joke this is like a, kind of a meme, because I'm trying to be also entertaining on the social media, and so here I show what, the usual media talks about, like always this graph, this sad graph, that doesn't, it's so messy, doesn't look anywhere, Kramer always, say all bad things about Bitcoin. And this is what I usually show. You see, even here in the chart, only linear time, never the log chart. We don't even show this log linear. And here, I use Sailor because kind of he's like kind of an enlightened Bitcoiner, but most of us, right? Most of the Bitcoiners are familiar with this, but we are not familiar with this, right? This is where I came in, crazy Italian scientist that tells you, look, there is a very nice, precise pattern. And this pattern is not just like a nice fitting, doesn't have anything to do with fitting. The fitting is just a tool to extract the power, and that is not where the emphasis is. Is the fact that it don't look at your eyes. I don't need to make any complicated math. Tell me how do I get such nice regular pattern that it's just striking with your eye, because that is where your intuition comes from. It's not anymore a question of math. It's a question of looking at the graph. This is why I argue many times with these pedantic math people that don't know math because they just studied in school, but they don't use it on a daily level. They don't live it. They don't make it, their own way of thinking about the entire universe. And they tell me, oh, the math here, the math there. Look at, before you do any math, look at the graph. The graph looks like a straight line. You cannot deny it, So if you do something that your math is telling you that is not a straight line, probably you did something wrong, or you don't understand what is going on. You don't understand the purpose of this. We are focusing on scale. We are focusing on big, large changes. We are not looking at the details. This is what it's all about. Many times we say, yeah, you of course your graph looks like in a log line because you're repressing the noise. That is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm telling you, once you forget about the noise, repress it, and you make it small, then it looks like there is a pattern. It's a way of looking at stuff that you were going to be distracted by the noise. The noise in the linear chart is not a story. The signal is in the log chart. And I show you already, I'm not just me that does this kind of thing. Scientists do that all the time. So if you don't know that, go and study science, okay? And come back and then let's have a discussion. If you don't know that, go and study science. That is my message to you. All these critics that don't know anything, I'm sorry if I am angry with them, but I'm kind of a little bit tired of repeating the same thing over and over again. I was not born yesterday. I have a white beard, So, and I have a PhD in physics, and there are other PhDs publishing Bitcoins and power laws.
I mean,
this is a same slide that I show you.
Just want to quickly jump in. I think this is all Bitcoiners are used to that, because we are still so early and not a lot of people actually know about Bitcoin. And I also have this feeling when I talk with people since the last 4 years in Bitcoin and talking about why Bitcoin makes sense, I think I can tell the same thing over and over again, and it's frustrating. Yeah. But I think it's important, if you have something that you really believe in and you think it's true, that you tell the world, even if people don't appreciate that. Just put it out.
I'm amazed about Bitcoiners because they come from all different backgrounds. Not all of them understand science, but when they look at graph like this, it's not because it's confirmation bias. Oh, look, Bitcoin is amazing. Of course, no, because I think these people have something special, in particular this particular stage, right? And more earlier you came in, and we have different experiences in life. Some of you guys are so young, but 10 years ago, you were a baby, so how could you get in Bitcoin? You didn't even understand it, right? So there is something special about Bitcoiners that have this intuition. Maybe they cannot express it in all this math, etc., but they get it. They understand. And it's not just about, making a lot of money. It's an entire philosophy behind, right? The fact that it allows us to be free from government. Okay, you don't care about me because you're printing money and you're making the richer. I'm going to invest in Bitcoin. Goodbye. So these are people that are revolutionary. They are early adopters, so they look forward. And so even if you have different experiences, we are all like a big family because we understand each other, right? We are contributing different way. Maybe you contribute somewhere else, right? When you talk about Bitcoin in your own way, this other person is doing it in this other way. All of us have something to contribute, and we always understand the same thing. My contribution here, being passionate about math and physics, is to give a physics look, right? But yeah, I cannot. I don't have to convince Bitcoin because they know already. Maybe they are surprised. Like, see, this is the last graph I'm going to show you. Sorry if I'm taking so much time, but there is so much interesting things. Like these are one of the things that I did recently. I started to combine both this growth along the power law with the regularity of a pattern. So there is such a thing, right? If you put and I didn't come up with this idea of putting Bitcoin on a circular map. Other people came up. I think one of the first people is called Rational Root. I think there was somebody else. But again, it doesn't matter if we came up. All of us contribute, right? We all work on each other and work and contribute, right? So my contribution, and so the idea is basically it's something that again, like the log plot, the log plot is not my original idea. It's something that is done all the time. We always, in physics, when we try to understand something that is cyclical, because Bitcoin has these 4-year cycles, right? Because of the halving, you want to put it in a map where time is the angle, right? Like in a clock, it's not so difficult to understand, right? It's like a clock, right? Time in like maybe young people are not used to analog clocks, right? With the ends, right? But us, older people like me, with this what we use for some time, and they are beautiful, right? Because it's analog, it's mechanical, But the end, the time there, if you think about, is basically the angle, right? Bigger the angle, bigger the time, right? And if you do an entire cycle, it's basically 12 hours, right, for the clock, and then another cycle. Two cycles is an entire day, right? With Bitcoin, one cycle is 4 years. So you can do the same thing. You can create a clock, basically, and you say, okay, I look at the price. And in that case, you see it is not going to be a circle because what the radius represents is the price. So because the price goes up, instead of being a circle, it's going to be a spiral, right? Because a spiral is basically like a circle that has an increasing radius, right? But the beauty of it is and I don't have a graph here, but you can find it in my YouTube, on my X. It looks amazing, particularly if you're trying to average out the noise by taking averages over a long period of time, let's say 1 year. It looks like a beautiful, beautiful spiral. And it's a power law. It's called a power law spiral, right? Because given that the path is described by a power law, the spiral is a power law spiral. And there is such a thing in nature, again, where a lot of different processes are explained by power law spirals. Like, for example, the trees in a ring, the tree rings. The tree rings, the way they grow, it's a power law spiral. How the horns are, like in a ram where the horns curl on themselves, that growth of that natural object, it's a power law spiral. How planets form, and they form like these beautiful spirals of the galaxy, etc. Power law spiral. Bitcoin is a power law spiral. So if you combine both the cyclical nature of Bitcoin and the fact that it follows a power law, and you put it all together, is a power law spiral. That is something that I realized recently. And when you put it all together, now we basically crack Bitcoin. Because look at this. Here in this graph, the top part is a trading view script that I wrote, right? It's an indicator. So you see the general trend. It's kind of a little bit wavy because it's adaptive. This is an addition that I did, like instead of being like one big straight line taking all the data, is kind of adapting a little bit to the local data. So it kind of also works in trying to tell you the local trend instead of a general trend. It does both in a sense. So you see the general power law trend, and you see how, it catches the bottom. See how here the purple was perfectly telling where the bottom was, etc. But then I made another indicator where basically I took this spiral something that looks like a clock because it's thinking in very linear terms. So I came up with the best thing that could do to represent the spiral. That is basically, you can take if you move around the circle, right, you can project the dot around the circle. You can project it on the x or the y-axis, right? I don't know if you ever, there are animations of that, like if you took a physics class, or there are things like that online, right? And then basically what you get is a sine wave, because a sine wave basically is a representation of a cycle. So it's a circle, right? So if you have and in this case, it will look like, it doesn't look much here, but if you go back to previous cycle, you see these oscillations, they became bigger and bigger and bigger because the price becomes bigger and bigger, right? So you can see that this little first semicircle is a little bit smaller than the other one. This represents the price becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the spiral. I'll try to show how the spiral looks like in a linear graph. And so the red one is basically the model, the power law model, that is this blue line. Maybe I should use the same colors, but it's basically the blue line in the linear graph. So see how it follows very, very closely the price of Bitcoin, that in this second chart is this blue line, right, that is kind of wiggly because, the price locally, of course, is going to be, noisy. But in general, look how fantastically well it follows that blue line. And then you see, I say, oh, it looks like a clock. So we have 0 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and all these critical points in this clock, right, are actually significant because, for example, at 0 o'clock, you have a top. Look at this. See, follow the little white line here. You see how it's exactly the top, right? And then 3 o'clock, what is 3 o'clock? It's the bottom. Look at this. It's exactly where the bottom is. Look at 6 o'clock. What is 6 o'clock? Well, 6 o'clock is basically, we went through this bear market, etc. The price was kind of moving along this power law, with some noise, etc. And then we reach a bottom. So it's basically, you are leaving behind the bear market. This is when you're leaving behind. So I called it a transition from the bear to the start of a bull market. So this is when the bull market starts. Then you reach 9 o'clock, and this is when the price goes above the trend line. And that is usually when you have a much crazier bull market, when things are really, so I call the transition to full bull market or frenzied bull market. So again, if you look at this point, it's a very significant, important point because things from that moment on are going to be like crazy. And look at this again. Look how precise. And I went back. I cannot show it here because it will be too cluttered. But if you could go to the previous cycle, it's exactly like this. All the cycle perfectly. Look at this. I'm not making it up, right? So in a graph, you can even say, oh, maybe you manipulate a little bit the graph. No, I actually, TradingView is doing it, right? You cannot manipulate TradingView. And look how perfect it is. Do you agree? Does it look very regular? Does it look like we are finding very important points on the chart?
It's fascinating that it actually matches with the cycle and follows that kind of a power law. And I'm just now because I came really new to this topic. I wanted to don't research too much about it and come with a new mind to it, because I think most listeners are also come with that new mind to to that power law topic. And I think it's a lot to process. And I think, and I recommend that to everyone that's kind of where I am right now, where I'm like, this is fascinating and I want to understand more of it. I actually recommend, and I never did that before, I recommend just listening to the whole thing twice, because it's something.
There is a lot of information.
A lot of information, a lot of things to take in, and I think it's a perfect, even like a kind of a masterclass for power law, like an introduction class, where it's like we started why is power law, the nature stuff, then on Bitcoin, and now we're getting really in the charts. And I honestly, I would love to give you feedback right now, but I'm kind of overwhelmed with a lot of information. The only thing I can definitely say. It's fascinating, and you made me curious to learn more about it.
And you see, by the way, we just so because this is where we are right now, right? So the time, in fact, will be really cool that people start to adopt this language, right? What is the time on the power law spiral clock, right? The PLS clock. And you can say, right now it's like what? And I can even calculate. In fact, I want to make a clock and put it online live, so people can see what time it is on the clock. So right now it's basically maybe like what, 6:05, 6:10, and that means we are over this bump that represents a transition from bear to start of a bull market, right? So really cool that this kind of feels like that, right? That we left behind the bull market, the bear market, and we are entering the bull market. We are not yet in the frenzy period, right? When it's 9 o'clock, but it's really cool. It's a way of thinking about these cycles and using this terminology. It's a really another interesting way of talking about Bitcoin, right? Maybe people will stick with that terminology, right? What time it is? Oh, 6:15, 9:30, and it's very useful because it tells you what to do, if you want to do investing, because it depends on your style, like we discussed in the beginning. Maybe you want to hold, like you probably don't want to buy Bitcoin when it's 0 o'clock, because just wait until it's 3 o'clock and then buy. Save your money. So if this continues to do the same thing, it gives you an idea of when you should do DCA. And if you want to continue, maybe do a little bit less DCA, right, when you are close to 0 o'clock, and then go really heavy when it is 3 o'clock, and so on and so on, right?
I think this would be
And
actually
I
really.
actually, these are we can end here if you want, because I made this joke. I say I'm going to tell everybody about power loss. I'm going to the physics conference, to the Bitcoin conference. Actually, I didn't invent this. This actually, power laws are so used in physics that we kind of almost like make fun of ourselves. So somebody else made this shirt because it's an internal joke that they are so common, and so many papers are published about finding power laws everywhere that we want to be a little bit self-deprecating. So we made a joke. Oh, I went to a physics conference and all I got was a lousy power law, and they say, okay, I'm going to scratch physics and I'm going to say Bitcoin. I'm going to sell a bunch of shirts to the next Bitcoin conference, and this is my like one of the representations, kind of color coded, relative to where we are. And so it's yeah, we should always make fun of ourselves. We should not take ourselves too seriously, but still, even if it is a meme, there is some truth there, and it's really really fascinating. And I would like to explore this with other Bitcoiners. So come to my X account, come to the YouTube, and let's talk about these things, and trying to understand Bitcoin better.
Yeah, I think a website where you show like a clock and which time it is and stuff like that. This would be really good in marketing this whole idea that where you can put people also where like this is the weighted DCA you should have, and with a normal DCA you would have so much Bitcoin. With a weighted DCA you would have so much Bitcoin. And
Right.
like I think you can do a lot of marketing stuff on top of this model, because they're like
Yes.
data, there's the models, but then you also have to put it in nice charts, in nice marketing things, to people that people grasp things. And this is basically what I want to do with Bitcoin itself, like make it
By the
simple
way,
and
I really
accessible.
love your accent. I think this will be really a cool interview where there are two people with some crazy accents, right? Yours is more like Schwarzenegger accent,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's a
I,
really
I get
nice.
that
I
a
love
lot.
it.
I get that a lot, that I speak like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and
Right.
there are some people that want me to say, "Get back to the chopper," for a
Right,
or
right.
I'll be back. They
Yeah.
wanted me to say that for a long time in the podcast now, and I think this is my 55th podcast, so I finally did it. I finally said it.
Yes, yes, because you found somebody else with a even stronger accent than yours, and hopefully people understand what we are talking about. But I think actually it would be really cute, that both of us have these strong accents, so it's so cool.
Yeah, it's
It tells also about, how universal Bitcoin is, right? Because people from different countries, different experiences, we all come together. It's a world thing, right? So different accent, different cultures, it's really amazing. That is one of the cool thing about being in this space, that you meet so many different people from different country, different backgrounds, and we have all these common things, that we love freedom. We want do amazing things in the world, So yeah, it's exciting.
it's like it's like a base layer to our whole financial system, and finances is so fundamental to our life that it's like unites the whole globe with like one base layer of asset. Like it's interesting thought model, like where can this go when we're like looking 50, 100 years in the future, and how will society change when we have one fundamental layer that's all across the globe, and there's a lot of freedom involved in there. Like, but yeah, this is one thing, because I wanted to start the podcast, because I think we are in a really early stage of an extreme revolution, and the goal that I have to interview as many Bitcoiners as possible. I'm now doing seven to nine podcasts a week. I'm publishing 5 of them per week. I want to publish like 6 and go to a daily upload schedule at some point, but I need more time for that. And in March, I make the step to do it full time. Like now I'm working till part time, but in March, I'm going full time on that. So, and I just want to document the thoughts, because
Yeah,
we don't have the documentation of the internet that well. Imagine a podcast that interviews all the people involved in building up the internet in
right.
1995. That would be
Sure.
sick to watch, and this is basically what I want to do with my podcast, documenting the whole
Yeah,
journey
it's
and
a very
seeing
good
that.
idea, and I really enjoy your podcast. I watch it all the time, every time you have an interview, because it's also a way of knowing different Bitcoiners, what they are doing, what is their way, because everybody's contributing their own ways, like different projects, different ideas, different approaches. It's all fantastic.
Yeah, perfect. We are the first time ever I'm approaching the 2 hour mark.
Oh, sorry for that.
No, it's. I think it's something good, because if you have a lot to talk, it means there's a lot of value and content in there. And I think the longer I do the podcast, the longer the podcasts will go. But yeah, let's see. And we're having, if you watch the podcast, we're having an end routine where the previous guest asked a question for the next guest. Your previous guest was Knut Svanholm. You probably know him,
Hmm.
the author of like really cool books, and I think he invented the meme of everything divided by 21 million,
Very
and
nice. Yeah.
a lot of cool stuff. And he asked you the question. It's like you have to know a film for that question, but I didn't know about that question. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Oh, this is a Monty Python
Yeah, it's a Monty
joke.
Python.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so cool. I don't remember what was the answer. I am a nerd and I love Monty Python, but I remember the context, right? That it was basically, they say, where do you get these coconuts? Because we were playing, I actually remember that movie so funny, because I was like a kid, and I was very much in middle age things. And all of a sudden, they say, oh, and now we have a Monty Python and the Search of Holy Grail. I say, oh, cool, because I knew what the Holy Grail was. It's a middle age movie. It's a night movie, And then I look at this thing, I say, what the heck is going on? These guys have coconuts, we have coconuts to play the horse hooves, and the Italian version is all in dialects. The French are Sicilian, talking in Sicilians, and because in Italy we have all these different dialects, and it was so funny. I was disappointed because I wanted a serious night movies. At the
Mhm.
same time, it was so funny that I was like rolling on the ground. I still remember the first experience, and I do remember that passage because they said, "Where did this is England? Where did you get the coconuts?" And they started to say, "Well, it came from a sparrow, but the sparrow cannot really live to it." And we have all these very in-depth discussion about the physics of flight of a sparrow. And I don't remember, what the exact thing was, but it was this crazy calculations we were doing about how far a sparrow could go with a coconut, etc. It's so hilarious, and I think actually it's relevant because it's like a kind of a self-deprecating thing, right? Like in one end, yeah, there is all this math, etc., but like a little bit like this meme, right? Like it's not that you are going to try to push it forever. Where okay, yeah, it's everything a power law, etc. But at the same time, even that meme was funny because in a certain sense, it's true, right? How the heck a sparrow can bring, if you use physics, you realize it's impossible, right? So it was a joke, but it was not a joke at the same time, right? So it's relevant. So even if I didn't answer straight, I think I kind of answer, right? Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I actually, when he asked the question, I was like, "What is that?" And oh, it's a Monty Python thing. I think
Yeah.
it's from
The Monty
1970.
Python and the search of the Holy Grail. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
the Holy
movie
Grail.
where,
Yeah, it's like 1970, 1980 or something like that. It's like an old movie.
right, right.
I think it
It's a
was
classic, right?
it was around that time when my father was born, so it's like it's long before my
Right,
time.
right. Yeah. But you find it on the internet, and that,
Yeah,
usually like very nerdy people, they memorize it, like all the lines, etc. So for sure, he's a nerd like me, and I knew the context. Like I say, I don't remember by heart the discussion, but it was all about using physics to understand how come these guys have the coconuts, right? Because they're using It's very absurd, right? It's like this English humor that is like absurd, right? Um, it's yeah, it's not
and I
realistic, but yeah,
and I love that
go ahead.
he put the question and you got the question because it is not planned something like I don't plan when who is on like as I do it with you like I just send a link out and you pick your date and time when you have time and he also and it's fascinating and he gives the question to you because I think it fits you perfectly. I think the 90% of all the other guests, it would have not been as suitable for that question.
Yeah, he asked a right question. Yes, it's
Yeah,
pertinent. Yeah, it's meaningful.
perfect. Then before we end, is there anything you want to add to today? And where can people find you? The best way, like where can
And you were
people
saying I
contact
need
you?
to make up a questions, but I can do that offline for the next
Yeah,
guest.
I usually do it offline,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So I can
you,
think about, and also you can tell me who is the next guest and
yeah.
so on. Okay. Yeah. So right now I have three different channels. So one is my X account. Right, it was in the beginning of the slides. Maybe if you have a link, etc., and your video, that will be great. So
Mhm.
people can come to my X account. I also have a YouTube account. So please, if you want to support me, because I'm trying to make this kind of a full-time job to be Bitcoin researcher and educator. So if you can, I'm doing a very Spartan life because I'm, like sleeping on the floor so I can stack more Bitcoins. But, I need to still pay bills. So if you like my work and you want to support me, please come to the YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and all the other things. If you really like my job, my work even more, you can also support me with Patreon. And by the way, the Patreon as you can get the indicators, that they show as part of being, I'm a community member because I have like a Discord channel, and so we are creating a little community there where we discuss all these things and we help each other, through trying to understand this knowledge behind the power law. So if you want to join our community there, you can do it through Patreon. It's very inexpensive, to the basic support, like $5, just symbolic. So yeah, these are the different channels, and I will give you the link. So if you don't mind to link all these things on your video, so people can find me and interact with me, and we can learn these things together.
Yeah, the video will also be posted, the full video on X, on YouTube, and all the podcast platforms. So actually, most of the listeners are actually on X, so they can just click on because I tag usually
Sure.
they can just click on your profile and then they see everything from you. And
Great.
on YouTube and all the other platform, I will just put like the link, and then they can go to your profile and see all the
Perfect.
following links. I think this would be perfect. Then, yeah, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being on, and
My pleasure. My pleasure.
maybe we can revisit the whole thing in 1 year and see how it went,
Yeah, it will be
and
interesting.
would be fun to
Compare
see.
prediction and what really Bitcoin did.
Perfect. And thank you for being on.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.